Good. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm absolutely delighted to have the privilege of chairing this august panel and discussion this evening. My name is Gavin Grant. I'm the Wiltshire Councillor for the town of Malmesbury, which until I discovered New College I thought had the worst parking problems in the area, but clearly some people are having some difficulties with that as we speak. I'm going to be your chair for this evening. I suppose my claim to fame in that regard is that I did convene the Wiltshire United Remain campaign in the referendum, and sadly can remember long ago back being involved in the student campaign in the original referendum. We won that particular one, as you may well recall. We have a very distinguished panel here this evening, and if I may, Ben over here on the far left, geographically please, no confusion in that regard, Ben Baccas, an EU lawyer, Ben, is that correct?
No, I'm a trainee solicitor.
You're a trainee solicitor, well, that's good enough.
EU law is one of my favourite topics.
Right for InFact, is that?
Oh yes, I write legal articles for InFacts.
Very good. Very good. We're delighted to welcome you this evening. Liz Webster. Liz, you've been involved as a claimant in the Article 50 action, which is still current, I think, and were the Lib Dem candidate in Swindon North at the last general election. Professor A.C. Grayling, I think quite a few of you might know or know of, even if you don't know him personally as yet. Professor Grayling, we're delighted to have him, of course, Professor of Humanities at New College. Now to my right, only geographically, Jason Hunter. Jason has just been depressing the pair of us actually at the table on the impacts on international trade and precisely what is about to be done to us. So if you come for a few laughs tonight, the door is there and we haven't started as yet, but we will listen with huge interest and a degree of depression, Jason, as you talk to us this evening. Over now to the table next to us, Sarah Church. Sarah, the Labour prospective parliamentary candidate for Swindon South. And last but by absolutely no means least, Dr. Robert Palmer from the Open University, I believe. Dr. Palmer, again, an academic but also a lawyer. Who knew there was such fun to be had with EU regulatory law? You obviously know very little about it, otherwise you wouldn't have turned up here this evening if you're expecting a bunch of laughs. Anyhow, we will start, the way we will conduct ourselves this evening, Steve, who is the gentleman with the hat, reasonably clear to all of us. Steve, you have a roving microphone. I think most of you were in the auditorium when I explained. If you would be kind enough to wait till Steve gets to you, because this is being streamed live, and we'd like to know who you are and to hear what you have to say to us. If I can encourage you to ask questions, please. I know many people will feel passionately on this subject with one view or another. I suspect they may lean rather more in one direction than the other direction, but we'll find out. But if you'll ask questions, please, and then listen with respect to the views and opinions given by the panel and the views and opinions expressed in the audience tonight, even if you profoundly disagree with them. Please hear people out this evening. We've got a number of questions that have been submitted in advance. I did a little roll call, and if I could just check, please, in the last few moments, has Kate Freeman arrived with us? Well done, Kate. We're delighted to see you. So you now know, and Steve is looking with absolute joy at the number of questioners who are sitting at the back of the auditorium. By the way, the rest of them, Steve, are sitting almost entirely at the front of the auditorium, so your number of steps will be very good this evening. So I am going to respect those who've submitted questions in advance. That's not to deny you your opportunity to ask questions as this discussion continues. But having introduced the panel, would you like to welcome them here this evening, please? Who've been riveted by the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. I'm sure you could hardly tear yourselves away from it. It was absolutely on par with the Ryder Cup, I think, for most people in intensity and excitement, if not people falling in the water. You may well be aware that the Chancellor spoke today and urged the Conservative Party to get behind the Prime Minister, probably not with a knife in their hand, but to get behind the Prime Minister on the issue of checkers. And our first question is on that topic. It comes from Mr. Adrian Young. Adrian, where are you? There we are. Can you spot him? So you've got to be alert now, Steve. I expect to see greyhound reflexes hurtling towards us. And I think, Adrian, you're asking questions directly relating to checkers. So please ask away.
Yes, Chair. I'm sorry if it's slightly long, but I'm sure you'll have short answers. I cannot recall a time when the parliamentary arithmetic was so important. Yet unless we fall back on asking the people, we need Parliament to make a decision, because another referendum or people's vote would be contentious and further divide the Brexit-weary electorate. Perhaps the only show in town with any hope of gaining a parliamentary majority might be a fudged version of the Chequers proposal. What modifications would panel members need to make Chequers acceptable and also likely to get through Parliament?
Good. Who'd like to kick us off with those sorts? Ben, what about you on the far end? How would you change Chequers? We're talking about the alleged agreement rather than the game.
Well, as we all know, the Chequers proposal hasn't been accepted by the EU because it's not compatible with its full freedoms, for example, the customs union, etc. So first of all, there needs to be an extension because we need more time to address that problem. But there's going to have to be a break in Parliament to force the government, possibly, unless it does go back to the people, on issues such as the customs union, because we all know the customs union is not going to be broken up. I mean, if you look at Article 28 of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, you'll see it written down there that the customs union the union will adopt a whole customs union. Now, if the UK leaves that, the barriers come up. That legal framework has been there since the EU started to develop. So we know we can remain in the customs union, but as we all know, the party, Conservative Party, Labour Party within Parliament, are all divided on such issues. So there's going to have to be an agreed amendment among all MPs, well, a majority of MPs, in order to bring that proposal in line. And it doesn't look very likely the way things are going.
Good, thank you for that. I wonder, Jason, if I could just come to you. From an EU regulatory legal perspective, is there any prospect of Chequers being delivered, or something that kind of looks like it?
As it stands today, the Chequers disagreement is dead. It was dead before it even left the building. The problem that the government have got is they've been ignoring the Article 50 process. Article 50 comes in two parts, or the withdrawal agreement. It's you've got the legal separation, the technical legal separation of the European Union and the United Kingdom. And then you've got these political declarations, which are the second piece. The first part is three simple things: protecting the rights of EU citizens in the United Kingdom and British citizens across the EU. Secondly, what are the financial obligations that we need to settle that we've already made, and when do we pay them? What's the payment plan? How much do we pay in what year coming over the next few years? And the third piece is making sure there's no border ever put back on the island of Ireland. And I think that's the most important piece. Now, that's the legal separation. If you don't get those three things passed, you have no withdrawal agreement, which means you have no transition agreement. Chequers, as far as the government are concerned, is all about the future trade deals, which is the political declarations about how we negotiate future trade. Do we want Canada plus plus plus? Do we want to be like Norway? Do we want to be in the EEA? All of that comes later. And yet the government have been playing stupid political games because they're incompetent. I don't know if they don't know what they're doing, well, I do know they don't know what they're doing, or whether they're deliberately lying to the public. And it's probably both. So Chequers as it stands is dead. It's unacceptable because it asks the European Union to break up the 4 fundamental pillars that underpin the single market. You know, the free movement of capital, of services, of goods, and of people, services, capital, and goods. And we're talking, Chequers talks about just having access to goods. It's a bit like in population difference in size, Kazakhstan coming to the United Kingdom saying, we demand a free trade agreement with you, and you're going to do it this way and this way and this way, but we only want a free trade agreement with Scotland and England. We don't want anything to do with Ireland, Northern Ireland and Wales. That's how ridiculous Chequers is, what we're asking the EU to break up their fundamental principles. It's dead.
Sarah, I thought Ben was suggesting that there was confusion in the ranks of the Labour Party.
Yes.
Do you think that's a fair comment or not?
What happened last week was that a motion went to the conference floor, that was unanimously voted upon, which was, I mean, it was born of support really for your cause, but ultimately, you know, we're not yet in the place where we're calling for that. If you've watched or heard what Keir Starmer had to say, you know, this is still a process that's ongoing. But it isn't really born of division, it's born of understanding where we've got to and where we need to go from here. 100% agree with extending Article 50. We're too close, absolutely too close. We've got the 6 tests that Keir Starmer has. Now, what the motion said over several pages of A4, lengthy script, was that basically, you know, the Labour Party totally believes we have to remain in, the wording is a customs union, but I think the customs union is the only option, and being extremely close to the single market. Now, what that actually means in practice depends how far we're willing to give up to make concessions on things like freedom of movement, because you cannot be close to the single market and then put your borders up and say no to freedom of movement in any sense. So I think that if we were in the position of making a deal, we would be talking on those terms of a bit of give and a bit of take. What else did I want to say? I mean, having been a soldier and served in Northern Ireland, I'm in 100% agreement that if anything, it would be unacceptable to us in any way to imagine a border of any kind on the island of Ireland. And the reason for that is the minute you had customs officers on the border, you'd put police service of Northern Ireland on there, and then I'd be getting my uniform back on and going out to protect them too. And there'd be violence, which I might add is it's not normalised over there, it is bubbling under. So that could be the crux of the whole thing. So what I would say is, it's not, I don't think it's division in the Labour Party. I think it's a case of saying, we get to see what November, when we're supposed to have all is meant to be revealed. I don't hold out massive hope, really, for the Conservative Party. But at that point, we need to make a decision on whether we can vote something through in Parliament. Now, unless it meets our 6 tests, and what we've seen thus far in the last 2 years, it's not even close. We're not even talking on the same terms as the European Union. The meaningful vote in Parliament has to be an option between something and something else, or something and nothing. So the likelihood is we are probably going to oppose what the government has to say, and then what? Well, I mean, at the Labour Party conference, the leader of the Labour Party said the preference is for a general election because the fact that Brexit doesn't exist outside of context. However, Keir Starmer was also very clear on this, that, you know, that the idea of coming back to the people is not off the table, and nor are any of the options that could be on a ballot paper.
Thank you, Professor. Grayling, preference for a general election, is that a runner as far as you're concerned?
I think, well, I must preface what I'm just about to say by giving you the grounds on which I say it. And that is that I have the very interesting privilege to chair the coordinating group of all the national Remainer organisations, and we meet regularly to talk about various aspects of our Leave campaigns. And to these meetings, we invite MPs and from all sides of the House of Commons and House of Lords. And a message that we've heard consistently, but with increasing emphasis, is that there is no majority in Parliament, in either House, for a no deal. That's going to be relevant later on. There's no majority in either House of Parliament for any form of Chequers. And there is no majority in any House of Parliament on either side for a general election. This is because the majority of MPs don't want to change the government just at the moment. So just before we get the Brexit matter resolved. And therefore the impasse that Parliament is in, the country, would suggest that the only recourse really is to go back to the people. This is an exact mirror image of what happened in the 1970s. If you go back and read the history of why there was a referendum in 1975, you'll see that it's the exact flip side. The problem that the Labour Party had in the 1970s over Europe is exactly the same as the problem that the Conservatives are facing now. It's quite extraordinary, actually, sort of mirroring the situation. And they had to go to the country because there was no way that they could get a deeply divided Parliament to patch up any kind of agreement.
Now, we're going to come to the people's vote a little later on, if we may, but thank you for those insights. But I think, Liz Webster, of course, aren't you contesting that, in fact, Article 50 has not been triggered in the first place? Is that, I know we've gone back to the future to 1975. You want to take us back to the future that never happened, is that right?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, everything about Brexit is wrong and illegitimate. So the decision we have discovered through our litigation was actually taken by the Prime Minister when she signed the letter which she sent to the EU, telling the EU that the people decided in the referendum, despite the fact that the Supreme Court said there was no decision made in the referendum. So it's all very messy and untidy. So I sort of disagree with the Labour stance of saying we've got to find some. I mean, there isn't a deal to be found anyway, but I think the best thing is to look at it and say the whole thing is such a mess, and it started as such a mess right from the beginning. And really all of the debate that Parliament are having now, or sort of the bits that they've been having, should have been a precursor to any triggering of Article 50. I think they should have known exactly what they were doing and where we were going if we were going to go ahead with doing that and go on that course. So I think that whilst we're trying to work out the political outcomes, I think that legally there's a lot happening. I know there's a lot happening, and a lot of court cases are going to start to come up like sort of fireworks all over the place, and cause, hopefully cause quite a bit of disruption. And I think that's really good, because people will actually start to look at the detail, they have to, instead of, go, we're out, get on with it, and, all of that sort of stuff. So I think it's impossible to predict what will happen. And my view is Brexit is illegitimate, and it can't happen because it destroys our constitution. And I will do everything I can to stop it doing that. The same thing happened in 1930s in Germany with referendum and the smashing of the constitution, and it had dreadful ramifications. So I think it's really important to try and understand why it's illegitimate. But I won't bore you with the details tonight.
That's kind, thank you. Sounds fascinating. Endless legal cases, lots of stuff for academic lawyers to get stuck in. So my question to you, Dr. Palmer, is would you prefer to be Canadian, Norwegian or Irish? Those are your sort of three choices.
I'm looking for my Irish passport.
Well, my first name is actually Liam, it's a bit of a giveaway, so I think I'm all right.
I personally don't want any type of new EFTA, Norway Plus, Canada Plus.
Can you help us a bit on what those actually mean? Because they're bandied about an awful lot.
It's just that there are different versions around the single market and customs units. Obviously, you need to be in those. I would like to go back to the original question, if that's possible.
Please do.
Is acceptable?
You can remember that far back.
In my opinion, the Chequers Accord is a political smokescreen. It is not possible. Colleagues over here have already referred to it. There is only two options, that is remain or no deal. Anything in between is an absolute lie, a smokescreen. Chequers Accord was there to give people the impression that there was still a possibility that we could come out of this unscathed. We can't. We can go back to the original Florence Accord or the Prime Minister's speech. On that day, she agreed with the Council that there would be in no way any divisibility of the four pillars. She's gone back on that word. There's now blaming the EU for not playing ball. So there's only what we cannot get that through Parliament. Everyone knows that will not go through Parliament. But to answer the question when it can be modified, no, it can't be modified. It either has to be scrapped, or we have to accept the realities that there is either no deal or we remain. And there's no much further to that. We have to remember what's in the media is there for my friends like the politicians to actually have something to say, and they're usually caught on these little tiny sound bites where they can actually engage with the question they're being asked, and you're being lied to all the time. It is bonkers that we actually are in this situation where only a few months before we're due to leave, that the only proposal the Prime Minister has come up with is one which is actually illegal. If you're in the European Union, it's breaking international trade deals. You cannot treat other parties, high contracting parties, in a trade deal more favourably. It's against the law. They're asking the European Union to break the law. It won't get through Parliament, and it cannot be modified.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm going to move us on, if I may, because we've started with quite a big picture piece, very topical to today, but I want to bring it to the direct and the personal, if we may. Amparo, you're a translator.
Yeah.
Did you work in Swindon or in the area? Or?
I work in Swindon, from Swindon.
Just hang on with it. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I should let Speedy Steve into you there. So I beg your pardon. You work in the Swindon area. You're a translator.
Yes, I work from Swindon. I have my office in Swindon, but I translate for businesses all over the world.
And as people maybe picking up, you're not predominantly from Wiltshire by.
No, I am from Spain. I came to Britain 32 years ago, and I've been living here since and working here.
How do you feel about the atmosphere since the referendum?
The last 2 years have been absolutely crazy for us. I have never felt a foreigner before in this country, and now I do. I know how it feels to be different, and I know how it feels to be scrutinised and judged. And yeah, I've been told, when are you leaving? Basically, this is my home. And yes, I just really want to know, we are 3.8 million EU citizens from other nations in Europe, in this country. And I would love to know what is the incentive for us to stay in a country that is throwing its own citizens to an abyss for which they have no plan, and an abyss that it's you just cannot come back from. And the atmosphere of, well, definitely the austerity, the financial issues that are coming with the possibility of Brexit, it doesn't bear thinking. It's also the instances of racism. There is an increase in amount of racism, and hate crime, quite incredibly on the increase, even on the week after, but not the week after, the days after the referendum. I went into a taxi, and the taxi driver asked me, "When are you leaving?" And I said, well, I joked, and I said, well, when Theresa May comes and takes me out. And he said to me, "Good riddance." That was, well, you can imagine, 32 years, this is my home. I didn't come here for any other reason than because I love this country. I wanted to make a living here, have a family here, which I do. And now I am debating whether to stay or whether to go, because my rights are not going to be respected in the way that things are going. But I'm positive, I'm optimistic, and I believe that Brexit cannot be done. I truly believe that it cannot be done.
Hands up, I'd like to see Amparo stay. Well, you're amongst friends here. And you also asked about multinational companies, but there are a lot in Swindon, and your concerns about what may be happening with them. I wonder, Sarah, if I could turn to you first about what you're hearing on the ground here, and Liz Bobby's joining in on the ground here in Swindon about the big players that are here, and of course the implications are for much smaller players who feed those big players.
So first of all, Amparo, thank you for being here and contributing to our economy for the last 32 years. An extremely positive presence, no doubt, and I've enjoyed living in Spain and France in my time, so there we are. I hope we can find a place where there is an incentive in future, but I'll come on to the business side of things. We recently held I know some people here came to it, a sort of Swindon Brexit summit with our MEP Claire Moody, and we brought along Honda as a sort of local big multinational, if you like, but also Business West, who was there kind of represented the small and medium-sized enterprises. The big business perspective is, minimum. If they're making non-political comment, put it this way, they say customs union is an absolute minimum, so that they can move their exports and imports in a frictionless manner, because the parts for a Honda car across the border maybe 6 or so times at least. But it isn't so much about tariffs, and nobody's talking about the non-tariff barriers to trade, things to do with packaging size and all of those, international sort of safety standards and all those things we don't think about, because everything comes with the European kite mark on it and things are moving seamlessly across borders. That gives them a headache. But what they did say was big players might be able to soak it up. We might pay a little bit more for our car, or they might move their markets to places where we have those deals. My concern at that Brexit summit, and it continues to be, and I'm still in contact with Business West over it, is for the small and medium-sized players. Because not only will it be the first time that those small businesses have to deal with new, and we don't know what yet, paperwork, masses of it probably. I mean, there was an example at the summit, I don't know if she's here, but a woman who had to wait 4 months for an invoice to be met. Now, if you are living invoice to invoice, potentially as a small business, that can be critical and can send you under. So while, we may get technical notices and all kinds of gov.uk help on running our small business, the fact is if you don't have an in-house expert, because it's you and one other or whatever it might be, you're going to find it very difficult potentially to comply with whatever the new third country regulations or administration is going to be. So I do have genuine concerns, which is, from the start, I'll take you back over, and I voted Remain. I reluctantly accepted the results and thought, okay, then let's see all these golden opportunities which have failed to materialise. But from the off, I've said customs union is a no-brainer because you can't function without it. So I don't think those large companies will leave in the short term. Whether over time they drift away, we'll see. But the small and medium-sized enterprises, if we start seeing them go under, not only are they the backbone of our economy, but also that's a dreadful, dreadful shame and a complete injustice to many, many people.
And if I can come to you, your partner's a farmer, and quite a lot of farmers, I think, to the surprise of some, I'm sure not your partner, but to the surprise, you wouldn't dare, but to the surprise of some, voted Brexit. What's the sort of view from the agricultural community, any views you might have on Swindon?
Some of our farming friends are leavers, voted leave. They don't do detail, and some of them have been lucky in that they sold some land for building, and so money is not really an issue. And they farm for fun, I suppose. There's some like that, and then we've got others who are tenant farmers who felt that things couldn't get any worse and thought it was worth voting Brexit just to blow it all up. I think now things are beginning to get tense because farmers do have to plan ahead, and I think they are beginning to wake up to what we've been telling them, that the country will be flooded with cheap products from America and South America. And then we won't be able to sell any of our beef, and 60% of our beef goes to the European Union. I think it's up to about 90%, but we don't have sheep, but the lamb, huge amounts go over there. It's a minefield. But I just quickly wanted to go back to the European citizen issue, because I have actually run a recruitment agency for the last 25 years. And for me, this has been the most difficult side of Brexit. That together with the racism, because my son was actually attacked here in the Ridgeway School nearly 12 years ago as a result of racial tension building. So for me, it's a huge emotional context to Brexit, and the schism and the polarisation that it's caused is so fundamentally dangerous. And I feel heartbroken that these people have come here. I mean, my grandparents were immigrants. They came from Germany and, German Jew, from Ireland. We're all immigrants in Britain, for God's sake, And I think it's so important because the one thing the Brexit camp have got is that they're so loud and bolshy and a pain in the blinking neck that we have to do more of that. And I am loud and bolshy, but I'm not racist. I'm completely tolerant and open-looking. And I urge you all to, wherever you go, and I do it myself, in the supermarket, in the pub, and I've had people read out. I remember one quite tall, fat man was really, very aggressive, and I think he was going to hit me. And I just thought, no, I'm going to stand my ground with you. I think we all have to do this and make people like Anna feel loved and welcomed and not being an outsider, because you are one of us and we are one of you.
Thank you for that. That's really good prelude, because one of Malmesbury's major, the largest employer of Malmesbury is Sir James Dyson. And Sir James, thank you very much. And Sir James takes a rather different view of this case. And he says this is holding Britain back, it's holding entrepreneurial. The WTO rules are absolutely fine. What's your problem?
It's fine for him because he's a multi-billionaire. It's not for the rest of us. Firstly, muchas gracias. Thank you for being here. I did a little bit of Googling earlier on. The Honda plant down the road builds a car, a Honda Civic, every 69 seconds. They have 2 million parts coming backwards and forwards across the channel. 2 million parts come into that factory, onto the production line, every single day. Imagine that each one of those parts, or each one of those containers, or each one of those trucks had 2 pieces of paper to check at the customs border. Today they don't, right? They just come straight through. Imagine the hold-up. 2 million parts a day. It's unbelievable. You've got Nationwide, huge employer in this area. Nationwide in the UK, they had profits down by 6% since the referendum. You look at Honda's UK profits, down 21%. We talk about having to pay a little bit more for our cars. Honda Europe's profits doubled last year. It's a 100% increase. They fell by 21% in the UK since the referendum. These businesses cannot continue to operate in the United Kingdom, even if they're large scale. They'll cope for a couple of years, and while they're planning to relocate those factories out. Because these businesses, they work on a 10 to 15 year program. I used to run strategic market planning for the 5th largest steel company in the world across the Central and Eastern Europe. And we had a 10-year plan, and we would plan 10 years ahead to destroy our competition. We're giving these large organisations the opportunity to move out of the United Kingdom as a result of Brexit, and that's going to cost us jobs. And if it costs us jobs, it's costing households their incomes and their livelihoods. We talk about small to medium-sized enterprises. There's 5.4 million SMEs in the United Kingdom employing from 1 to 25 employees. 5.4 million. 334,000 of them currently ship to the European Union. You can ship from Swindon to Manchester in the same way you can ship from Swindon to Madrid. When we leave the European Union, all our treaties cease to apply. That means we're now exporting. 334,000 small to medium-sized enterprises with 1 to 25 employees will have to hire freight forwarders, customs agents, or they'll have to go on training courses, learn the skills themselves. We don't have sufficient customs agents and freight forwarders in the United Kingdom because we've never needed them before. And where are they going to come from? The European Union, our friends and neighbours across the water. But why would they want to come here? I echo your point. Why would you want to live in a country where its own government is just treating its own citizens like, well, I won't swear because we're being filmed. It's a horrendous situation.
Please, Professor Green.
Well, I just want to say firstly, it's an utter disgrace that our fellow citizens, and we are in Europe and they are our fellow citizens, should be treated discourteously by anybody in this country. It's absolutely shaming. And I think it's an utter disgrace that they weren't given a voice in the referendum in 2016. They are among
I think somebody's agreeing with you.
they are among the people who have the most material interest in the outcome of the referendum, and they were denied a voice. That seems to me to be disgraceful. I have on my news feed every day lots of newspapers from around Europe, and one of them is the Luxembourg Times, which constantly...
Can I just check any other readers of the Luxembourg Times? Okay, no, please go ahead.
It keeps track of the number of British companies moving just to Luxembourg. Today, the tally was 40. 40 companies going to Luxembourg. And today, also in the news, was the fact that Paris has been picked by all the commentators, international observers of the financial markets, as being the new hub for financial services in Europe, which is shocking when you consider what a huge contribution is made to our economy by the City of London. You talk about the importance of SMEs. I mean, Sarah is absolutely right, and Jason, they're crucial. They are the backbone of the country. Transport. Some news came out last week to say that a 30-minute delay at any of our ports or at Dover would bankrupt 1 in every 10 such companies. Would bankrupt them if there's just a 30 minutes delay. And the thing that really exercises me is that talk about businesses having to close down or losing profits, laying people off, increasing unemployment. It's all very well just to talk in these round terms, but think about it. Think about the human cost of people who lose a job, a family without a wage earner, dependent upon welfare. If a big company like Honda or Nationwide in Swindon, if they were affected by a downturn and 21% drop in profits, that has big impacts on the cost base. It makes people want to get rid of employees. Just think, if there are 3 or 4 people in the street who are now out of work, or several hundred people in an area of a town, what happens next? The little local cafe closes down, or the second-hand bookshop, or this happens. There are empty shops here and there down the street. The weeds begin to sprout. People start to move out. The degradation of the whole fabric of society starts to set in. We've seen it happen in parts of our country, back in the 80s, when there was a huge amount of devastation done to the manufacturing base in this country because of political policies at that time, in the early Thatcher years. And you see what it does to communities, and it increases resentment. And one of the things that is so worrying about our country at the moment is that we've had pretty well 10 years of austerity, and leaving any form of Brexit, even the most optimistic form of Brexit, is going to be worse than the last 10 years of austerity. And think of the human cost of that. That, I think, is one of the most sort of awful things about the prospect that faces us now. And guess what? This is utterly unnecessary. There's no reason to be doing this. The trigger for this, the reason why this is happening, is because of an internal party political quarrel of the bloody Conservative Party. Excuse me, right? But that's the only reason why we're doing it. But what's the problem of that?
I don't think we have to excuse the French on this particular one. I wonder if I could bring Daniel Pitt in here. Daniel, where are you? Right, see, there you go, Steve. I thought you were looking a bit relaxed over there, so we'll get you moving to Daniel. Because you asked us a really question about the level of understanding of our MPs, I think, on some of these matters. Please, no. Please speak to us, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I'm an engineer, and I'm very proud of the investment in Honda and BMW in my hometown. I fear that my question has probably already been answered. The question is it now tacitly acknowledged by our MPs and our political leaders that Brexit will inevitably lead to the decimation of our high-tech manufacturing industries, cars and also aerospace?
Thank you. Professor Grayling, I wonder if I can just come to you, because you're probably the person that meets most with MPs on across party. Obviously, you support membership of the European Union. But just your experience, and I'll ask others on the panel too, of dealing with politicians. Do they get this? Do they understand what the implications are here? I do want to come back, by the way, I know it's a lovely soundbite, but I do want to come back as to the serious point about why somebody like Sir James Dyson, also an engineer and an entrepreneur, takes an entirely different view. But please.
Well, look, there are some very good people in Parliament. There's no question about it, on all sides, in all parties. Some very impressive individuals who work very hard and who care very much about this country and who are doing their best in very difficult circumstances. But I have to say, I'm shocked, absolutely shocked to the marrow of my bones by the level of ignorance and misunderstanding and so on that I've met with in quite a large number of them. I've been pestering MPs since the 24th of June 2016 with letter after I sent rafts of letters to all MPs and then published them in the New European newspaper just to embarrass them all. I can't tell you, I've had some disgraceful replies from MPs, I have to say, unprintable and certainly unrepeatable here from some MPs. But from others, I've had startling evidence of just a complete lack of understanding of how our constitution works, for one thing, or about the impact on our economy and on individual human lives. It becomes clear to me that even on details of things like the EU withdrawal bill, they haven't read it and they haven't paid attention to it and they haven't really thought ahead. And there's an enormous amount of doctrinaire stuff and careerism in politics, which is very dismaying. And I think, I'm a great lover of Europe and a great admirer of this whole very flawed and lots of problems, but then it's because it's a great imaginative project which will take a lot of work to put right, which is the EU. I'm a great admirer of it, except in one respect. And it seems that it's had a deleterious effect on the quality of too many politicians in the following way, that in the old days, there were great ideological battles between socialism and capitalism and so on. And when we think of the politicians, I know the grass was always greener when you were younger. That's because people used to buy us ice creams. Now we have to buy our own. But when I was a young person, I used to think that the politicians of the day, or on both sides of politics, were sort of giants in a way. They were interesting, intelligent, and dedicated people. Well, what's happened since we've been in the EU, of course, is that the parties have argued over who's going to manipulate the steering wheel, really. There are no great, huge ideological divides left if you're in the EU. It's a matter of management and of working together with our partners in Europe to build up this great structure. With the result, I think, that some of the people who might have gone into politics in the past have gone elsewhere. They've gone to do other more interesting and more challenging things. With the result that, and with the very, very greatest respect to our two prospective parliamentary candidates here who are completely contrary to the remark.
Well caught.
With the consequence that far too many of them are of extremely poor quality, very third-rate people. I've been dismayed because we depend upon them in this hour of crisis to be clear-minded, to be principled, to be putting the interests of the country before the interests of their own personal careers or their party unity. But what the hell has party unity got to do with it when we're looking into the abyss like this now? And yet that's what they're mainly worried about. So I have to answer that question, but rather long-windedly by saying there are some very, very good people, but there are some appalling people. Thank you.
Well, you should be so lucky. I'm represented by James Gray, so it's going to get worse, really. But is some of this the EU's fault? I'm not looking at you personally, Ben, but the sort of complexities of EU law and treaties and so on. Is this just beyond most normal human beings, if we count politicians as normal human beings can?
Well, I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Is it your fault?
Is it
the lawyers. Well, that's what I'm going to come. Bob, you're not getting away with it either. Is it that this is just so complicated and so difficult that most mere mortal politicians are just can't put their heads around it?
Perspective. I brought some props along just to help people, and by the way, I've got a. Fue en España la fin de semana pasado. ¿De dónde eres? ¿En España? Ah, fue en Cataluña.
When you're finished, fine. Just talk amongst yourselves. What's going on? I just something inappropriate.
So I'll show you my props. Now back in well, not long ago. I'm still quite young.
Is this the show and tell part?
No. There has been a severe lack of education amongst MPs. So we demand, who should we expect? This is my it's fairly old now. A book on EU law. This is the English legal system, and this is another English legal system book. It's quite complicated, but our MPs don't seem to be displaying any knowledge of how significant the legal framework is that the UK is in. For example, small businesses which will rely on it, do rely on this single market, will be badly affected. Bigger companies probably take the hits a bit more. I mean, you just sort of look at things such as, if you go back to the treaties again, which will cease to apply, as Jason says, There's a really interesting case called Cassis de Dijon, which looks at this Article 34 of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, which wants to prevent quantitative restrictions between member states. So,
now pay attention, there'll be a short written test on this.
I wrote it down because it's a bit long-winded and it gets quite boring. But imports between member states, thanks to Article 34, you can't have them. There are instances where a member state can say, well, for public policy, health, etc., you can have them. But in the case of Cassis, there was a German company who wanted to import the Cassis de Dijon drink into Germany, but they were prevented from bringing it in because it didn't meet a minimum standard. The interesting thing that came out of the case, the German company took the German government to court, and the interesting thing that came out was that goods that are manufactured within one member state, manufactured and marketed within one member state, can be sold in another member state. Just think about that. There's no paperwork, it can be made in them, you can market them. That means I can make something in the UK and I could sell it in the entire single market, subject to some restrictions, of course, public policy reasons. But generally there's no paperwork required and you can get it across the border, no problem. And there will be no customs checks on those goods. So leaving this framework within this legal framework is not being communicated well to the public. And it's not that hard to find the treaties because they're all there and they're all written in a way that's easier to understand because they've got to be translated into different languages, so they need to be interpreted well. So I don't think the education of how the EU works and its benefits to businesses as well as individuals has been communicated well. And there's a further point on the EU citizens. No one seems to be, in the referendum campaign, no one seems to be discussing how we can control the borders. I mean, all you've got to do is look at places like Belgium or look at the restrictions that are placed. The UK government hasn't been doing that, or successive governments haven't been doing that because, well, I don't know why, but generally, as we've all seen, EU citizens are a net contributor to the UK economy.
We've needed the people.
Yeah, we need the people, and also just the benefit to us as individuals. This is more of an emotional point, but look how many people we get to meet who come to the UK. We get to meet them, learn their stories, learn about their country. It's amazing. We're going to lose that. Once the UK leaves, the treaties cease to apply. The UK, in a no-deal situation, becomes a third country. That means we, as UK citizens, do not have EU citizenship. We get treated differently across each EU country's different individual policy on non-EU citizens coming in. It's going to get very complicated.
Complicated, Bob. I mean, is it basically the lawyer's fault?
No.
I mean, most of us probably think it is, by the way.
I think lawyers can be blamed for their lack of expediency at the beginning. I think we're all hoodwinked, so to speak, by how quickly everything happened. And it's only now, when everyone's had a chance to rethink about things, that the ideas about how to challenge the decision, for example, which is Liz's case, we've now got the Wilson case where the legality of the referendum is being challenged. But I don't think it's the lawyer's fault, essentially. I believe the parliamentarians should have a basic duty to understand the rudimentary principles of the Constitution before that they are actually allowed to be parliamentarians. And to blame the EU would be very difficult too, because if you go back to Florence and remember what the Prime Minister agreed at the time, one of those principles that they actually started was to preserve the autonomy in regards to the decision-making of the Court of Justice of the European Union. At the beginning of this process, our Parliament, our government agreed to these terms. They've just changed the terms. They've relinquished on their promises. And I don't think anyone can be blamed right now about what happened, apart from whoever thought of having a referendum in the first place, is the executive. We have to bear in mind that the executive at the moment are supreme. That's not how our constitution works. There's 3 limbs to our constitution, and at present the judiciary is silent. The legislature is silent. We've got one limb of the constitution functioning with no direction. There is no plan. I can't seem to think to blame anyone right now other than the people who are in the cabinet or in the executive. To blame anyone else from any other country, or even looking in the mirror and blaming ourselves, I think is for the birds personal. There's only one place to blame right now, and it's none in this room, and it's no lawyers in any of the courtrooms, there's none of the academics in any of the electoral halls, apart from their silence perhaps. But we have to take a really serious look at what's happening to our constitution here. Our rights derive from the constitution. The courts and parliament are our guardians when it comes to our rights. And right now there is no functioning of our constitution whatsoever. We need to have a really serious look about what has happened. We need an inquiry to find out what's happened. And we need to look seriously at ourselves at why we allow something like this to happen. To you, to me, we're in the same boat, we're losing the same rights, and our rights are not being protected. There's only one person to look at, one area to look at blame right now, and that is simply executive supremacy over our constitution.
Now, the executive is meant to be held to account to Parliament, and we have 2 aspirant parliamentarians who both nodded and clapped enthusiastically about having in-depth knowledge of the Constitution. I'm not going to test you on it.
Well, I am a student of law, just to point that out. I've done my Constitution.
Dear God, they're everywhere,
and I'm on my EU module right now, as it happens. So, qualified, not yet, but much more than some.
And please don't know what they're talking about?
I don't. I think there's a point that's well made about some of the outcomes of the political system that we have that is archaic and not fit for purpose, is that you do have people come in who perhaps aren't if they were going to sit in front of a panel of a job interview, it might be a different story. And I think that is true, and it's something that there's an excellent book, isn't it, called Why Do We Get the Wrong Politicians, or Why Do We Vote for the Wrong People? And I think there's something in that. The constitutional rights, I think that there's something we haven't talked about yet. The thing that rode roughshod over them. Who was it who called our judges traitors? Who was it who said that anybody in Parliament, those Tory rebels in inverted commas, all 11 of them, who stood up for what they believed in, that we should even have a sort of democratic representative democracy play its role, they were absolutely pilloried by the media with vested interests. And I think that something has to be done about that. And they're often also at the core of this divisive language. Now, I don't know that I know the ins and outs of why their vested interests lead them to do this. I don't know. I expect there's all sorts of money and relationships and power and whatnot goes on behind the scenes. But I think that the executive, while they are holding this sort of dominance over Parliament, as a minority government, which is just extraordinary, actually they are not in the power. They are not in power. They're in administration, and it's about the steering wheel, as you say, and who's really pulling the strings. I'm no conspiracy theorist, but I do think that we need to have a look at the impact the media has as it has sown hate. It's allowed people to put up, they printed photographs of people standing in front of billboards with thousands of migrants and all that sort of disgusting imagery that was part of the referendum campaign. So I just sort of wanted to bring that up as an extra thread. That while I'm more than happy to blame the executive pretty much for everything at the current time. I see that there's more to it than that, and that one of the problems with our process, our constitution, is that it's being interfered with from outside, and I don't know the answer quite what we do about that.
Now, go on, that's great. Now I'm going to bring you in, Jason, and we're going to move to Ireland. Well, not literally, but we're going to go there.
I think that there is a problem. We need to look at the question of whether there is outside interference in our processes here. But actually...
Is this the Russians?
Yeah, but most of the interference comes from inside, I have to say. And I just want to give you very, very quickly, if I may, just a couple of examples. I don't know whether you know the following fact, that if there's a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons against the government, there has to be another vote of confidence 2 weeks later, just to see whether people have changed their minds. Now, we're talking about a group of people. Yeah, we're talking about a group of people who push back against the idea of a second referendum in case people have changed their minds and learn a bit more. So the inconsistencies. Now, that inconsistency is multiplied over and over again in the way that an executive can behave to suit itself. Obviously, in that case, an executive is protecting its own back, isn't it, by saying, well, we've got to have a delay and then we'll have another vote later on just to see. But look at the 2016 referendum, look at the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, look at the referendum on proportional representation in 2011, look at all the referendums since 1975, which was the first of them. Every single one of them has been run on a different basis. A different franchise, a different electorate was constituted for them. In 2014, in Scotland, 16 and 17-year-olds, EU citizens, were included. They were given the vote because they were going to be affected by the outcome, not in the 2016 referendum. Go back to the devolution referendum of 1979, a minimum threshold of 40% was put in. 53% of Scots with the vote voted for devolution in 1979. That was 37% of the total electorate, so there was no, it was 34% of the total electorate, so there was no devolution. If you're a trades union, you have to have a 40% minimum threshold of the total membership of the trades union in order to call it strike. If you have a strike without it, it's illegal, you lose your funding, you're taken to court, there are penalties and so on. Let me ask you, do you know what proportion of the restricted electorate that was given the franchise in 2016 for the EU referendum voted to leave? The answer is 37%. 37% of the total electorate voted to leave, and a massive constitutional change is proposed for our country, affecting its future. There is no, and we know not only about that, but we also know that crimes were committed, and this is in the public domain. The Electoral Commission found that crimes were committed, and there is suspicion of outside interference. And everybody on both sides of the House of Commons talks about respecting the 2016 referendum, which is the least sort of respectable thing that's happened in our recent history, because it's convenient for them. There was a lovely tweet today saying, no, not a tweet, it was a letter in the Evening Standard actually, saying that Mr. Corbyn says that we should respect the 2016 referendum, but not the outcome of the 2017 general election. Now you can just see, if we are faced with constant inconsistencies like this, but here's another one, this one should really surprise you. I'm going to end here. Jason has got to come in, he knows more about everything than the rest of us. I just want to point this out to you.
On the panel, though, it's not me.
In 2011, the European Union Act of 2011 was passed in order to make it very difficult for the United Kingdom to go into any further integration in the European Union. In the 2011 European Union Act, a double lock was instituted which says that if there's any proposal about a variation of the EU treaties, either the treaties of the European Union or the treaties on functioning of the European Union, that there would have to be an act of parliament in this country and a referendum. A double lock it's called, to stop us from going any further into Europe. This was put forward by the Eurosceptics, it was accepted by the Cameron-Clegg coalition government as just to throw a sop to these people who caused such a lot of trouble, mainly in the Conservative Party. Because they didn't think that they were ever going to get a leave result in any future referendum, they didn't realise that not only does the double lock stop you from going any further into EU, it also stops you from coming out again. So this had turned around and bitten them absolutely on the bum, because they thought that this was going to, keep us where we are at the moment. But then, when the thought was that we would have a referendum to go out of the EU, here was the double lock. See what they did? They repealed it. They repealed the 2011 Act. They perfectly, unfortunately, have total sovereignty of Parliament. They could repeal the Act. They did it quietly. Did you hear about it? Yeah. Did you hear that the double lock on giving us another say? Because what that Act said was that after, what it entails is that after a decision made by Parliament and after arrangements had been agreed with the EU, there would be a referendum to make sure that the people were happy about those arrangements. And since that was intended to stop us from going any further in, it would have had the effect of stopping us from coming out, because we would have been entitled to another referendum on the deal in the terms of that Act. But in the EU Withdrawal Act, they quietly repealed it. And moreover, what they did was, the 2018 European Union Act says that the Secretary of State, just to specify which one, can just sign an order on a date of convenience to the government about when the 2011 Act ceases to apply. In fact, that Act ceased to apply on the 4th of July of this year when the Secretary of State signed an order. I just want to point out, the lawyers here will tell you, it's not since the time of Henry VIII that ministers just signed orders to abolish laws and to change things and to do something like that, which, by the way, takes away our rights as citizens of the EU to live, travel and work anywhere in 28 countries. I mean, removal and diminution of our rights without any discussion, just getting rid of that provision, which would and should have given us automatically another referendum on any deal. They just got rid of it. Why? Because it was expedient to do so. So that point that Robert makes about having to look at our constitution is vital. When we stop Brexit, when all the dust is settled and we've kicked a few deserving rear ends, perhaps in the following election, all we need then to, we cannot go back to the status quo ante. We've got to put things right in our very unequal and very unfair society. We've got to look at the harm that's been done to so many members of our society by the austerity measures that we've had. But we also have to look at our constitution. We've got to